Julia heard footsteps and squinted her eyes. She recognized them immediately. It was me, her despised stepmother. For the past 6 months, the stepmother had been a mother and a father to her, and if Agnes used to brilliantly portray herself as a good woman before, now she had no intention of hiding her true self. As soon as Julia was brought home from the hospital, Agnes immediately said to her, "I really hope you don't spend much time in this world. In fact, it would be better for everyone if you were dead. But you managed to harm me even here, and while I won't kill you, I'll do everything I can to make sure you die before you reach adulthood." At that moment, Julia thought that the stepmother's words were just her imagination. It couldn't possibly be true. Perhaps the medications, several difficult surgeries, and the overwhelming sense of guilt were taking their toll. But soon enough, she realized that the stepmother wouldn't stop at anything. There was too much money at stake. A few years ago, Julia was a happy person. She was studying at university, adored her beloved father. She lacked nothing, despite her father's immense wealth. She was never a troublemaker, never learned to sing like her friends. She was pure joy and her father's pride. Julia didn't remember her mother, of course, and she longed for a mother's affection, but she had grown so accustomed to her father, filling that void, that she never felt deprived. And then, when her father turned 45, he brought Agnes into their home, introduced them, and said they were dating. At the time, Julia, who was already 20, understood that her father had performed a true act of heroism by not getting married all those years, so she greeted Agnes warmly. Initially, she didn't like the woman, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. She was beautiful, well-groomed, and polite. But then she realized it was the eyes. There was something off about them, lifeless, cold, empty. And what was even more intriguing, the expression in her eyes, her gaze, never changed. She would look at her father, at Julia, at the table or the wall, but when expensive things, especially jewelry, came into her field of vision, her eyes would light up. Julia and Agnes observed an unspoken neutrality, trying not to interact and treating each other with utmost politeness. Her father saw that his girls didn't argue or only after Agnes, and he proposed to her. On that day, when everything happened, Julia rushed home at full speed. Clutched in her hand was her brand new driver's license. Her father had offered to buy it, but she insisted. "But Dad, why should you pay for everything? Am I so dumb that I can't pass the exams on my own?" And she did pass on the first try. And now she was running home, not only to make her father happy, but also to finally ride her own little beauty. A month ago, her father had given her a beautiful red car. "Oh, I passed?" Julia exclaimed happily. Her father came out to the hallway, his face filled with disappointment, even anger. "Congratulations," Agnes muttered as she walked by, furious. "Dad, is something wrong?" "No, my dear daughter, everything is fine. Just the burdens of family life." How could he tell his daughter that his wife demanded to transfer half the company to her just to secure her future? He assured her that the entire company would belong to his daughter, as specified in the will, just to be safe. Agnes flew into a rage. He had never seen her like this before. And he even began to wonder if he had rushed into marriage, but that was a thought for later. Right now, he didn't want to spoil Julia's joy. "When you're driving home, my dear daddy, do you have time on your hands?" "Let's go," he said. "Now?" "Yes, now." They drove out of town. Julia looked at her father like any daughter would, as with everything you do, it's perfect. And then a truck came rushing towards them from around the corner. Julia slammed on the brakes, but it felt as if the car simply sank. The speed didn't decrease. Her father understood it all. He grabbed the steering wheel, turned it, and put his side of the car in the path of the truck. The door opened. "Well, aren't you dead yet? What do you want, Agnes? Oh, you have no idea. I want you to leave this world before you turn 21, unable to inherit anything." "You won't have to wait long. I will inherit, and you won't stop me," Agnes smiled. Julia was deeply unsettled by her smile. There was something sinister about it. You know, my dear, I came up with a story. It seems you're sick, or rather, you're cursed with bad luck. It's very difficult for you to be in the city, so I've decided to move with you to a country house. By the way, I fired your caretaker today, but I found you a new one. The new caretaker will take care of you as you deserve. I wonder what you ordered from the depths of hell. Yuri was desperate. What did you come up with now? She almost guessed. She took out a sheet of paper and started writing. To Roman Sergeyevich, convicted 7 years ago for murder. Moreover, he was very aggressive in prison. He's responsible for numerous broken noses and bones of his cellmates. But how do you like it, Agnes? He almost danced with joy. He has nowhere to live and nothing to drink. And he hasn't seen a woman in such a long time. Congratulations, my dear. Very soon, you'll be reunited with your daddy. For now, they needed to gather all the necessary things. Agnes, dancing, stepped out of the room. A couple of hours later, during which Julia stared blankly at the ceiling, they arrived. She used to love their country house, but now she realized that it would likely be the final stage of her life. Julia felt like crying. Agnes paid those who helped bring Julia here and looked around with satisfaction. Look how nice it is here. Birds singing, fresh air, and most importantly, no one around. You can scream or cry, and no one will hear you anyway. There's a fridge full of groceries, so the caretaker can even feed you so that you won't starve right away. But I have to go now. Agnes blew an air kiss and left the room. Julia heard her talking to a man and realized that the new man had already arrived. Sergei couldn't believe his luck. He had just been released a week ago. He didn't even try to reach out to anyone he knew, because he knew that no one would want to interact with him after what happened, and it was understandable. They took away his house as compensation for some damage. Basically, he had nowhere to go. He tried to work as a janitor, and they almost hired him, but then some woman recognized him and started screaming so loud that they practically pushed him away. But he just wanted to watch TV, even as a janitor. He was squatting by the wall of a store when a fancy car drove by. It stopped a little further ahead and then reversed. A beautiful woman in her mid-30s got out of the car. Sergei stood up, wondering what else was needed. She looked at him with interest. He had quite a sight to behold. 2 meters tall, broad shoulders, a 2-week-old beard, a nearly bald head, and clothes that were long out of fashion. He had just been released. He was slightly taken aback. "What were you imprisoned for?" she asked. "Unlike money, you won't earn it." He was very hungry, simply savage, and he said, "Murder." The woman smiled, handed him a large bill. "Here, go eat. I'll come back here in an hour. Wait for me here. You need a job, desperately. Here, good." When Sergei heard what job she was offering him, he was shocked. "Wow, I'll take it, but you don't even know me. I just got out of prison," he said, "and that's exactly what I need." Of course, he agreed. Who would refuse a job with accommodation, especially given his situation? When the woman left, Sergei looked around. What a mansion! He understood that it wasn't just a country house on a small plot, but to this extent. Apparently, this family had not just a lot of money, but a lot of money. The only question was, why was he here? Sergei cracked open the door to the room and immediately encountered the frightened gaze of a girl's eyes, filled with fear. "Hello, my name is Sergei," he said, and approached the bed where Julia lay, looking pitiful. But that was all the scary guy could see because she closed her eyes. He decided that he would have to open her eyes himself. The man stood in front of the bed, arms crossed over his chest. "Do you always lie here?" Julia nodded barely noticeably, and he shrugged indifferently. "The hospital said it's possible, but the stepmother said to lie down. I couldn't sit, and there was no one to help." The caretaker was afraid. There were cameras everywhere. Obviously, nothing was clear. "Are you hungry? Do you want to eat?" Julia looked at him in surprise, but she didn't understand anything. In her imagination, he was aggressive and imprisoned for murder. He should have attacked her by now. She thought maybe she was dying, and it's better on a full stomach, especially since no one fed her today. The girl looked up at the man again and nodded. Well, wait for about 10 minutes. I'll see what we have. He looked around and saw the TV remote, then handed it to Julia. Don't get bored here. The man left, and the girl stared at him in astonishment. Did he really smile? Maybe he's some kind of maniac, and he needs to subdue the victim first. Sergei appeared 20 minutes later. Julia had barely managed to distract herself from the TV series and had completely forgotten why they brought her here. When he entered the room, she flinched. The man pushed a table on wheels in front of him, with her bed and food on it. She glanced at the food. Fried eggs, fresh vegetable salad, thick slices of bread, and sliced smoked meat. Not particularly healthy, but smelled so good. He paused, looked at her, bent down, and extended his hands. Julia squealed, and Sergei recoiled. What's wrong with you? Did I hurt you? He asked. No, what do you want? Did you want to sit me down, or will I eat lying down? Julia blushed. He bent down again, sat her up so she was supported by pillows on both sides. It felt so good for her to watch everything from a normal angle. And only after a hearty dinner, we'll talk. He brought coffee and tea for himself, pulled a chair closer, and lowered the volume on the TV. But I'll tell you why that woman didn't like you, and the girl, without understanding why, told him everything. About her dad, the car, the accident, and being told she would never walk again. He listened without interrupting, only asking at the end, Do you think she hopes that I'll finish you off? Something like that? Very interesting. Okay, let's get some sleep today and talk tomorrow. By the way, is this your country house? Yes. Do you happen to have your medical history here? I don't know, maybe in my father's office. It's on the second floor. Why do you ask? I used to be interested in medicine. Well, take a look. Maybe there are some of your father's things there if you need to change in the morning. The smell of coffee woke Julia up. She opened her eyes and realized that she hadn't woken up once during the night. Can I have some too? Please? She asked. Sergei slapped the table with a thick folder and went to the kitchen. He returned silently, picked her up, and carried her to the bathroom. Julia felt incredibly embarrassed, but there was no escaping the natural process. Then they drank coffee and talked. You don't really look like a cold-blooded killer, Julia said, staring at him. But of course, I'm not a killer, he replied. It's like the stories you told me yesterday. Well, today it's my turn. I'm a surgeon. I was incredibly passionate about my work and always took on the most difficult cases. It so happened that I ended up in a private clinic. Alongside me, or rather my boss, there was a person for whom money mattered more than anything else. He purchased a batch of low-quality medication, and I immediately realized that it shouldn't be used after surgery. People were already weak, and their bodies had to fight against it, so I strictly prohibited it in my department. Then I was told that if I caused trouble, I would be kicked out. I thought that if I got kicked out, they would kill everyone with that poison. And I agreed, although I bought the medication with my own money and switched it. One day, my medications disappeared, and everyone was injected with it in the morning. 6 people died, and I had a pocket full of receipts, right for that medication. Julia listened, holding her breath. Wow, it turns out her life wasn't the only one turned upside down. In which hospital did you work? Julia asked, looking at him with teary eyes. And was it the same hospital where you were treated? Julia didn't quite understand why he wasn't walking, but she would figure it out if he allowed her to. In the evening, Sergei didn't eat outside. He placed Julia in a chair and started grilling kebabs. It was the most positive experience Julia had in her life recently. For the past 2 days, Sergei had been studying her medical history. She asked him, staring at him with teary eyes, "Can you trust me?" Julia smiled. Of course, what choice do I have? Stepmother won't allow anyone to listen and help me anyway. She didn't expect it would be this painful and scary, but Julia obediently did everything Sergi told her. When her stepmother called for the first time, Julia could already sit up on her own and even stand. She couldn't walk yet, but she was thrilled with her progress and knew that she wouldn't give up now. Upon hearing that Julia was still okay, her stepmother made an effort not to show her displeasure. But Sergi said, "Isn't there anyone you can trust and talk to? I'm sure the brake failure in your car wasn't just a coincidence. There's one person, but your stepmother will never allow us to meet. She almost convinced him that she's a saint, and after the accident, I'm practically incapacitated. He came once when she was away on a business trip. It was a nightmare. She started vomiting, and it was just a nightmare." "Who?" "He's a family friend, well, of my mom and dad, I mean." Sergi left for the city the next day, and Julia quietly tried to walk. She managed to do almost everything when no one was around. In the evening, a car stopped outside her window. It could be anyone, even her stepmother. Julia pulled the blanket up to her chin. She was very scared. The next moment, she heard voices. It was Sergi and Artem Nikandrovich. Julia sat up, then stood up. Another man, her father's friend, his confessor, entered the room. "I hope you understand that if I came here for no reason, you'll have big problems," he said and turned around. Julia didn't understand anything. Agnes said that he hadn't been able to get up for a long time and was practically dying. What was happening? They talked for several hours. Then Artem Nikandrovich started getting ready to leave. "Don't leave the house. Wait until I come myself, and I hope I'll come tomorrow." The evening was somber. Julia understood perfectly well that she wouldn't see Sergi anymore. She was afraid to admit it even to herself, but now she couldn't breathe without him. At night, she quietly got up and went to his room, leaning on the wall. He wasn't sleeping. It was as if he was waiting for her. He just asked, "Will you regret it?" Artem Nikandrovich arrived for Julia in the morning. They had tea, and he talked about how Agnes behaved when they came for her. She could barely hear that the car was sent for forensic examination, and the doctor who treated Julia was taken into custody. Agnes completely broke down before leaving for the city. Julia took Sergi's hand and said, "I promise you'll wait for me, do you hear?" He smiled. Knave girl, now she'll immerse herself in her familiar world of money and luxury, and won't even think about him as soon as the car moves. Julia turned to the man she had known for many years. "Take this, Artem, I need to talk to you about Sergi." Sergi lay down on the couch. He honestly didn't know what to do. Should he wait for Julia? But it had already been a week. She probably thinks she forgot about him. Should he leave? What if she comes? Besides, he had nowhere to go. I turned on the television, and even though it was so boring, the news kept playing. Sergi was about to change the channel when he saw his photograph on the screen. He jumped up and turned up the volume. It turned out that Sergei Viktorovich Romanov had become a victim of the cunning machinations of the chief doctor. The doctor had falsely imprisoned him for several years. Who would be held accountable for this? It was decided that the management of the private clinic would compensate him for all the years he spent behind bars. It was a substantial sum. Sergei Romanov would also be reinstated in his position after assessment. He collapsed onto the couch. This simply couldn't be, it just couldn't. Could it be Julia? Only she could have brought all of this to light. Knock, knock. "Are you receiving guests?" He jerked up at the door. There stood his Julia. She held a cake and a bottle of champagne in her hands. "I missed you so much," she said. He rushed towards her, embraced her tightly, and sighed. This is true happiness. And let anyone dare to say that 13 years is a significant age difference. If you enjoyed the story, please support me with a thumbs up. And to stay updated on new interesting stories, press the bell icon when subscribing. Have a wonderful day.